And we're on. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the second episode of our brand new podcast, Save versus Bourbon, where we drink casually and talk much less casually about all the nerd stuff that we love. I'm Brandon.
I'm Steven.
And today we have a special guest. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Howdy, I'm Pat.
So Pat is a fellow role player who we have played with for, many years now. But she has some more unique roleplay experience that we thought would be valuable for the purposes of this show. So she's been brought on as our resident LARP expert.
Oh, well, I wouldn't at all call myself an expert, but I have LARPed for about a couple years of my life.
That is much more experience than the two of us combined. That makes you the expert here.
Unless you count playing Little League Baseball, LARPing as a Major League Baseball player.
Philosophically, I don't know if I'm willing to say that or not.
It's the only thing that comes to mind that comes close to my experiences. So, yeah.
Okay, so for those who may not be familiar with with this show, what we're going to do is we're going to spend probably about an hour and a half talking about the nerdiest things imaginable. Today's topic will be modes of roleplay. That is to say, tabletop, freeform text, over Discord, any way people like to roleplay. We may end up talking about cybering for 40 minutes. I hope that doesn't happen, but it might. And anyone who's viewing this podcast live on Twitch is absolutely free to talk to us in the Twitch chat. I will read off salient comments and we will respond to them. And yeah, that's the goal.
As always, I am super excited and ready to partake in much alcohol.
Yes, it is of vital importance. So important, in fact, that it's the name of the show. So, to begin, let's talk about our various experiences with tabletop roleplay. And I know that we did this last episode, but, a little refresher. And since we're going to be talking a lot about dice on a tabletop roleplay, it's going to be important to get this out there. So, as I said last time, I play a lot of World of Darkness. I run games. I also played a lot of Pathfinder, a lot of D&D 3.5. I have done much less actual playing of those games than I have done GMing them or storytelling them, however you want to put it. I've also spent a long time doing freeform text roleplay, obviously cybering, and I've never LARPed, so I know nothing about that side of things.
As for my turn the wheel of going down experience, similar to Brandon's, I've been freeform text RPing for many years now. I actually started out in a weird forum setup before I met all you guys, actually on shout out to Rooster Teeth back in the days when they had forums and personal pages. And then I moved on to various other sites, and in that time I've also picked up Pathfinder, D&D, World of Darkness. I have not actually had an opportunity to play in real life across the table from somebody. I'm looking forward to it, and I've never LARPed.
So just to date myself real quick. So the first time I ever role played, and I don't know if anybody out there is going to be familiar with this website, but it was called RDN. It was a Red Dragon Inn. It was a play-by-post forum RP site.
Oh, I've heard of Red Dragon.
Yes, that is how old I am. Pat, please go ahead and introduce yourself, because you're the one that nobody's heard about.
Well, I think we're all pretty similar in at least our freeform, just text roleplay background. I started pretty early, about 12 years ago. I had my humble start on making just horrible edgefest original characters based on Naruto on DeviantArt chat rooms and various places.
All right, somebody shotgun that for episode not 3 but maybe 4. The worst character you ever made.
Oh no.
I think our group, well, me and you, Brandon, probably know what my worst character ever made are.
Well, yeah, we could talk about that all day, but
a discussion for another time.
You said.
A discussion for another time. Today, we're here to talk about roleplay and how we do it and what makes good roleplay in the various formats we use. I guess that's sort of the idea here.
The rest of my background, really quick, on as far as tabletop, I compared with Brandon, I don't have as much experience with tabletop, but I have played physically with old buddies from high school, kind of late high school era for me. It was really just a single game of Pathfinder that we got our characters from level 1 to 8th level, a pretty just kind of year-long story. But after that, I've done more just voice-based roleplay, just as we are now, just communicating verbally. And then a bit of LARPing, which I have done about roughly a year and a half to 2 years of LARPing. That was a few years back. And I can talk more about that when we get to that part of the show, when it's more. I can elaborate on that more.
To explain on that just a little bit. So, a lot of our quote unquote tabletop gaming kind of exists in a halfway house, where what we're actually doing is rolling dice virtually and chatting on Discord.
Or Skype in the dark days.
Yes, or Skype in the dark days. So there's going to be a bit of a difference between what we mean when we say tabletop and what other people might mean when they say tabletop. So just so you know, anytime we mention the tabletop, we may be talking about an actual tabletop, and we may be talking about a kind of virtual tabletop type situation.
Your Roll20, your actual tabletop simulator.
Yeah, I generally use tabletop, whatever the case is. If I'm talking about a game that's designed for tabletop play, like Dungeons and Dragons, World of Darkness, I believe that's how you guys refer to it as well.
Right, and you know what the weird thing is, though? I had actually intended to use one of those tabletop simulators, where you can draw maps and grids and have people go places, and then I just ended up never using it. At some point, it just became completely irrelevant. It doesn't actually matter in my games, I guess, precisely where people are standing in relation to each other? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think that's all that weird, really. You can have an elaborate playmat in Dungeons and Dragons, but even in D&D, it's possible to keep track of kind of general positioning just in the wonderful theater of your own mind.
The world of imagination!
Yeah.
I have nothing against theater of the mind. I have everything against the world of imagination.
Hey, now, the world of imagination is a delightful place where only good things happen.
Except for the aforementioned edgelord characters.
Okay, yes, and weren't they great?
So very great.
Anyway, so to begin here, I want to talk a little bit, because we've already talked a lot about tabletop in the last episode. We're going to talk a little bit about what freeform text roleplay actually means. Because a lot of people haven't done that before, and a lot of people think it's, well, super lame, I've noticed. It's not, but I can see where you'd think that. So, basically the way it works is you play by post. You write a few paragraphs, you paste a few paragraphs in your Discord or Skype or DeviantArt, whatever you're doing, and then someone responds to you, and you build a narrative that way. Important distinctions: most of the time in text roleplay, there's not a DM. There's moderators that, are basically there to keep people from getting out of line, but there's nobody. I'm sorry?
They're strictly there to drop the ban hammer.
Exactly. There is nobody actually guiding the narrative. The goal is that the narrative should flow naturally from the way the players are interacting with each other.
A character-driven kind of drama.
Right. Like, you don't go into a freeform roleplay expecting a major overarching plot, because without a GM, it's just not going to happen.
Unless you're intending to go in there and run your own plot secretly while nobody else knows what's going on, and in which case you have an effect very much like herding cats. It's just not good for anyone. Well, no, I'm not going to denigrate any form of RP we're doing, because obviously we've done it all and enjoyed it all at one point or another. Oh my God, look at that.
Thank you very much, Truth, and you're appearing on my stream!
He's a buddy of mine.
Oh, is he? Okay, cool. Anyway, so the way the freeform basically ends up working is that you have, if you're going to have conflict, it's going to be basically factional. There's a lot of... One thing that freeform definitely has over tabletop is PvP. You don't get PvP on the tabletop, and if you do, it doesn't last very long, let's say.
You can absolutely have PvP at the tabletop. You just have to do it in the... Basically, you have to have a GM or a storyteller who is willing to let the players fight, which is always hilarious.
Let them fight.
Let them fight. Only the strong will survive. Oh God,
that gives me... enter, one man leaves.
Unfortunately, that gives me an idea for an idea for a story I want to do now.
Excellent. This is good. I like stories. Distorted Truth says blood for the blood god. I do agree. But yes, that is really the beauty of freeform, that you can have these flowing narratives that pit players against each other, and that doesn't end up derailing the game most of the time.
Yeah, if you end up having a lot of PvP in your small tabletop group, that I can't even begin to imagine how, as an ST or as a GM, you would actually facilitate that and still have a cohesive group that can continue to meet.
You wouldn't. Half the group would just rocks fall the other, and then you would have half your player base. That is how that would go.
Right.
Essentially what you end up with is a situation like, well, not so much All Guardsmen Party. Has anybody ever read the story about That Guy Destroys Psionics?
I have read that, but I don't remember it.
So yeah, I'm in the same boat as Brandon, yeah.
So, story time, briefly. That Guy Destroys Psionics is essentially about a guy who, through Craigslist or some other variant of social networking, discovers a tabletop group to play in. He goes in, but the GM's kind of sort of a bit of that guy, insists upon running a no magic campaign, everything must be psionics, so on and so forth. And essentially he's the most laid back person at the table, and he makes a decent character surrounded by quote unquote edgelords, and they attempt to kill his character, and he just makes a mockery of them and then gets kicked out of the game. I highly recommend looking it up. You can find it probably on like 1D4chan or Reddit, or I should assure you somewhere on YouTube there are people doing dramatic readings of it. But it is hilarious and a prime example of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's on 1D4chan.
That actually brings me to one of the better points about freeform text roleplay: dramatic readings.
Oh, dramatic readings. We've done we've done a few of those a time or two.
Yep, and it is always an utterly humiliating experience, even if the roleplay in question wasn't that bad.
I've not experienced such a thing.
To be fair, Pat, you are compared to the two of us, you're the fledgling of our little cohesive commune of insane people.
No, I understand I am.
Also, Nick is gone, so...
Yeah.
So, that's going to bring me to some other touchy things about the way we roleplay, right? Because...
Can't be too touchy. I'm borderline drunk now.
What, already?
No, I'm just saying it for dramatic effect.
Oh, okay. Anyway. That is going to bring me to another little point about the way we were role-playing, about how you design not a narrative, but a character, an emotional kind of flow. Over text... Has anyone else noticed this? That over text, everybody sounds like... everybody sounds like... What's the word I'm looking for? It's not Shakespearean, but it's kind of... overthought, I guess?
Yeah, I think I see what you mean. The dialogue isn't... it doesn't look as natural, if you were actually
Purple,
speaking...
That is exactly right, Phoebe. Purple.
Purple prose, oh yes.
And, okay, fine. Purple narration, sure. It's fun to read. Honestly. One
character comes to mind with the topic of purple narration of yours.
Of mine?
Of yours, yeah.
Is this going to be a discussion for the worst characters we've ever made discussion that we're going to have later?
I wouldn't say he was one of your worst characters, but he did like purple.
He definitely...
And he did like prose.
Okay, yes, but... Yep, that's going in the worst characters we've made discussion, actually.
Fair enough.
But yeah, so there's something kind of unnatural about the flow of roleplay when you're in text. You can do a lot of amazing things in text. You can create, awesome pieces of narration. You can fully describe every little action and movement that may have some meaning to it. But what you can't do, apparently, and I don't... Okay, I guess you could. But what I'm saying is what you can't do is have them talk naturally.
For the gamers out there who have not so much probably done much forum roleplay or text roleplay, think back to, let's say, the original Mass Effect. Those conversations didn't exactly feel natural. They were too stilted, regardless of how quick you were on the stick to select the dialogue choice you wanted. It's just the way that, regardless of how it is, somebody says something, and then you have to wait for the response.
That's true too. Although
Yeah.
that's something else.
Yeah, you can't interrupt someone in text roleplay, exactly.
But God, it would be hilarious sometimes.
Yeah, you can't interrupt somebody. That's probably the worst thing about it. And I could see a group like having a way or a method for that, where, especially with Discord, where you have the edit function, where you could make a post and then someone could say, "Well, actually, my character's going to interrupt you halfway through that sentence," and then you could just go back and edit it. That'd be fine.
But that only really works with righteous, cool people and people you've known for a long time. And a random pickup with people that you don't know very well, I don't see that being a thing, because every character is a special snowflake, and yeah.
Right. I don't know, it's just really, you lose a lot when you go to text, and that's fine. That's what we go into. We go into it expecting that.
It's like reading a novel, and two or more characters are having a discussion or dialogue, and you pretty much, aside from whatever's being described around it, you just have the dialogue to go on. You don't know what might be said in the background. You can't have, you don't know if somebody's shouting out across the room in the background, having another conversation. It's hard. That's what feels natural, like multiple conversations going on at once and people reacting or not reacting as it goes on. And text-based roleplay, it's a bit problematic, because if you start trying to do that, the post ends up going longer and longer, and there's a longer time between posts, and eventually what would be like a 35-minute scene ends up being 3 hours, and so on and so forth. And Truth is actually referring to the fact that he refers to me as Stove and believes I'm an alcoholic.
Oh! I see now. So, you actually just gave me a brainwave, but before I go on that, it sounded like Pat was actually wanting to say something.
Oh, I think I was, whatever it was I lost, but I think I was just talking about, like, trying to describe what you went on to call, like, the purple prose and all that.
I'm sorry, Pat. Just shout me down whenever I go on a rant.
It's okay. No, this is good. This is like the stuff we get that we can't get from text roleplay.
Yeah, exactly. We can't talk over each other.
Yeah.
He said, talking over her.
You're all good.
No, you see, I was playing with the narration. Anyway.
Yeah, well, narration is also a strength. But anyway, go on.
So, there was a way that another group... Okay, not really a group. A loose association? No, not really that. A bunch of assholes. There we go. That was a way that a certain bunch of assholes I knew dealt with both the natural problem and the time per post problem. They had a method of roleplay where there was no turnover, or turn order. Whoever got their post out first, that happened first.
I think I know the group of assholes you're referring to from a specific site in a specific room on that said site.
They existed there, but that's not where they started.
God, I think of several groups who had a posting style like that. Holy shit.
Right, and okay, I could see the value of it. I honestly could. It makes dialogue snappy. It makes posts short. It makes posts quick. And also, only fast typists can play.
And which goes even further. You have fast typists, but then you have... Which this is a discussion for a different day. We're not going to dive fully into the various aspects of text roleplay, because then you get into the various their dice systems or the various combat systems, and it's just a big blur of emotions that's not really regulated by anybody except other people. And essentially boils down to, it's like, sure, you might be a fast typist, you might be able to get the response across, but if you're dealing with this person and they have their own rules or they follow a specific credo, they're just going to decimate you because they're quicker and they have a mind that knows the quote unquote rules for this area.
Right, and well, okay, and yeah, and that's a basic problem with. That's not a problem with the roleplay method so much as it's a problem with the community.
And we are a loving, accepting community. But just like any community, we have those assholes.
I actually heard that we're a bunch of elitists. We are the most accepting group of elitists on the internet.
I believe it.
Well, yes, because once we accept someone, then they get to become an elitist too. It's kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Infection vector.
Conjunction.
Our elite. I am. We are. Our elitism is a contagious disease, and we use forms such as this as an infection vector.
Phoebe says, not letting in the Kirby with a vor fetish is hardly elite. I don't disagree, but a lot of people would. Specifically people who roleplay as Kirby for reasons other than the fact that he's a cute little pink puffball of ultimate power.
We're not
horrible abomination cute pink puffball.
We're not going to get into the rant about whether or not Kirby is an eldritch abomination and all-powerful. That's for another time.
Okay.
But we do need to do that.
Yeah, we've got all the time in the world, so, yeah.
That is true. Maybe that'll be one of the topics for the coming special.
The coming special.
The one that may not be able to be aired on Twitch.
Oh, God.
You see, Twitch has a policy against excessive alcohol consumption.
My God, why am I still on here?
Well, because this isn't excessive. We're just having fun.
Fair enough. We got off the rails somewhere.
We did, but I know where the rails are, and we can get back to them.
All right. Lead on, Mr. Pathfinder-ish type dude.
Like a ranger. So we talked a lot about how text roleplay works and in some sense doesn't. Like I mean, it absolutely works. We've all done it for years. We all love it. It definitely works. But we discussed the ways in which it kind of doesn't. That are really they're really mitigated just purely by being able to hear people talk.
Right, like when we were starting out, before we had all of the Discord and Skype and all those various methods, when we just were anonymous names on the opposite side of a bright glowy screen. We didn't know what either one sounded like, and after I learned what you and what Pat and what the others sound like, I can start and visualizing the cadence of their characters speaking a little bit easier. I also didn't realize that apparently some people that I'd find somebody who sounds very similar to me, according to some people.
By the way, if you think Steve and I sound exactly identical, please say so in the comments, and then subscribe to my channel.
Or subscribe to my channel.
Both. Do both. Because we're the same person, we sound identical, right?
Correct. What you don't realize is that this is just an extreme case of dissociative personality disorder.
Whoa. I'm so disassociated that half of me lives in Alabama. Where do you live?
Arkansas, you prick.
Oh. I knew it was one of the ones that started with an
Eh.
What the hell am I getting into?
You're our special guest.
To how many people?
What do you mean?
How many of there are you?
At least
Brandon,
one.
Steve. That's good enough.
Yeah.
We are Legion.
We are all Geth? Okay, really, we're gonna get back on track, okay, guys?
We need an emote in the chat for when we go off the rails.
Yes, we need an emote that's just a train with no rails. Anyway, so
The heresy train has no brakes.
yes, exactly. So anyway, and a lot of that problem that we have in text is mitigated purely by being in a voice chat. You can get a lot more like meaning and emotional content through in a shorter time period when you're talking about it, and you can act, you can get over the top, and then maybe feel a little bad about what you've been doing with your life and have a slow breakdown, not at all caused by alcohol. You can get all this range, is what I'm saying.
It's a lot easier to just do an impression of the voice that you want to convey for your character, as opposed to every time a new person joins in, describing it as being like nails, being like glass struck across gravel.
Or very monotone.
Yeah,
right. You don't have to do all those. You don't have to do all that description stuff because you can just do an impression. That said, I mean, I have a policy on my tabletop that players do not roll social dice against each other.
which is a good system, and I believe, honestly, yeah.
But yeah, I'm going to have to read that out loud, okay? Honestly, to me, Phoebe says, honestly, to me, Steve sounds like a redneck crossed with Arnold and a drunken nerd, and Brandon sounds like that barkeep you can't trust crossed with the child of Martha Stewart and Stephen Colbert.
God bless you, Phoebe.
That's brilliant.
Can we get that on a shirt?
It all makes sense now.
That's
Just
the way
like-
it is. That is the way it is.
Just a picture of me drawn like Arnold with, a bottle of bourbon, and, a picture of Brandon as the shifty barkeep with features like Stephen Colbert and Martha Stewart.
Well, see, what Phoebe failed to mention is that the reason you can't trust me as the barkeep is because that drink I just gave you is going to put you under.
I would attest to that if any of your drinks ever put me under in the first time around.
Well, anyway, what I was trying to say was that I have this rule that my players do not roll social dice against each other. They do not roll bluff checks against each other. They do not roll subterfuge against each other. What this means is on my tabletop, a character's ability to lie to another character is solely based on the player's ability to lie to the other player. And in a way, that's bad, right? In a way, that's not good, because, some people are not good at lying.
It's even worse over voice chat role plays, because all you have to go on is this tone of my voice. And if I talk exactly like this, you can't determine where my emotional range is going with it. So I could...
Right, see, and that's why I have my players, when my players actually compete, like, in social checks against each other, I usually turn it into a different check. Like, if a character lies to another character about, I don't know, the location of a object, then I will have the other character roll, I don't know, perception or something to try to find the object that the other person was looking for. Like, I don't draw attention to the fact that they're lying to each other, because if I say, hey, roll a subterfuge check, that's going to tell the other player immediately that they're lying.
Correct. But also you run into this problem where if you have people who are friends or play with each other enough, regardless of what one person says, quote unquote, anytime I play a rogue, it's just the other characters are like, I don't believe you.
Right, but that's just prior experience encroaching onto current time.
I don't believe that you're not going to shoot that guy as soon as we turn our backs. I don't believe you're not going to steal that.
Wait. You also play the token evil teammate?
I play the token chaotic neutral teammate and occasionally leaning towards evil.
God, we really are identical.
It's amusing.
Anyway, so that's the way. That's basically the way that shakes out. Like, you can really accomplish a lot in terms of the subterfuge and the play acting and the delightful emotional content of your RP by simply being able to hear each other. But, well, nonverbals are nonverbal, but one thing you can't do, really, is get a good sense of the body language, and I think that's where the LARPing comes in, right?
Yeah, when you're LARPing, live action roleplay, you're physically there with someone, you get the whole range of actually interacting with a person. Like, you get the tone of their voice, you get their words, you get their just their appearance, whatever they look like, because costuming is a thing.
Their mannerisms.
Yeah, it's all there.
Right, and costuming, that is something I actually didn't think about, because LARPers wear capes.
Yeah, I've seen someone show up to a Vampire the Masquerade game in a pirate outfit, because their character was like an old-timey pirate.
Nothing wrong with that.
You know, I think I'm going to go the
Nothing
other way
wrong
on
with
that, and the next time I make a vampire character, he'll be a Somali pirate, like a current one, a modern one.
I am the captain now.
Look at me. Yes.
Shit.
So what that brings to topic is playing it across the table from somebody. Like I said, I've never done it, but I've seen enough streams of people doing it, and I understand the concept enough. And you can get, some mannerisms and things across by just associating a person with the character they're playing and looking at them as they talk. And if they're very, what's the word? If they use their hands to talk a lot, they're very animated with their way they're speaking. You can kind of determine a little bit what they're saying, but at the same time, it's still like, well, I'm talking to these people and to the storyteller or the GM to convey what's going on. So it's just like I'm expressing these thoughts, and this is going to be whether or not, based upon their opinion, is going to be whether or not these things succeed. Where that comes in with LARPing then is you don't really have that so much, and you have to literally pay attention to how somebody's face is, because it's not like they're looking across the table and looking to multiple people. They're looking you in the eye. So if you have any kind of experience dealing with other people, you can start making references, or just like, okay, so this person's lying to me because they have they're not looking me in the eye, or they're looking this way and this, that, and the other. That's just where my mind went with that. Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're absolutely right. I think one thing I can say about LARPing is at least the kind, like the style, like the games I've experienced, they're like extremely, like highly immersive compared with like even tabletop. And like sometimes I get totally immersed like in a tabletop or like a voice, like tabletop, whatever game. But in LARP, like you're like, so is now like a good time for me to kind of talk about?
Yes, then that was actually the perfect time to talk about
okay.
that.
Okay, so my more on my experiences with LARP. I have been to a couple different kinds of games, mostly one particular kind of game run by what's called Mind's Eye Society, which is a big World of Darkness kind of fan club. It spans like across the whole United States, and like there are all these local like cities, locations all over the place where you can like go to just the local Mind's Eye Society group, and they'll have like LARP games running.
How the fuck have I not heard about this?
I don't even know how I found out about it. But yeah, it's pretty big. You can just, they have a website that you can just go to Mind's Eye Society and like look up games and stuff. But anyway, my experience with how the games went, I've played a few games like Vampire the Masquerade. Like I played a Changeling the Lost character. Those are like my two main games I played for a couple of years. And the structure of each session, they're like monthly games. You have like a big group of people. It's much bigger than like your standard like 3, 4, or 5 like player tabletop game, because you can get like between like a dozen or like up to like 20 or 30 players there at a venue at a time. And the games generally lasted like 4 hours, and when you show up and game starts, like they're always going to be like out of character like signals. If you need to like communicate with someone out of character, obviously it has to, like that option has to exist as a safety thing, as well as for new people to get rules and all that. But in like when I played those like 4-hour games and I got into character, I was like I was being that character for like mostly that 4 hours. Like they're all, you can't, I don't think a lot of people can be 100% like acting a character for like that long, like straight. But for like besides like a couple breaks, like they would have like out of character areas or something you could go to just hang out. But for the most part, during that 4 hours, I would be immersed, just playing my character, and then a lot of like out of character communication would happen like before or after the games, mostly. And I can contrast that with how in like tabletop games there are a lot of kind of like distractions or just kind of jokes people crack, or kind of things that kind of happen out of character. And I've realized that like those, like someone like makes a joke or like laughs, like, or something goes on out of character, that like didn't happen as much at these LARP games.
I feel I might be one of the biggest transgressors of that particular sin.
I don't think it's that bad, but that's I kind of like that about tabletop games, but it's also an interesting difference in like LARP games. They're like kind of from start to finish, like the game is going on for like a dozen or more people.
That's super interesting. The reason that's interesting is because what I've just realized about LARPing is in the tabletop, right? You can have dialogue, talk back and forth, but you also at some point have to look at the GM and say, "Hey, my character does X." Well, in a LARP, you don't do that. You just do X, right?
Mm-hmm.
It does mean that when it comes to LARPing, physical attributes come more into play than in a tabletop forum. So you're not going to be
if it's
doing
a combat LARP, I guess.
Well, actually, it really depends on the game. Much like any tabletop, the LARP game might be more combat focused, or it might be more like social, like intrigue focused. So I can cite the 2 different games I played. One was the Vampire the Masquerade, and that was like a very social game where actually a lot of what happened during that game, like in a given game session, was people like just kind of palled around in character and just talked in character about stuff going on in the game. And then, so a little bit more background just on kind of how they set up the games is like during that night they would have like a venue, like they would rent out like a club or like some small little area that's like maybe a couple rooms large, however, like wherever that spot is, and that's just like the space that the LARP took place in. There, and then as far as the like game master, like the storyteller, there would be a VST or venue storyteller who's the big boss, head honcho, like running the show. And then they would have multiple ASTs or assistant storytellers to help manage and herd all the cats that are running around the players. And so, like a lot of the time, like people would kind of sit around and chat and like just role play, like talk in character. But the team of storytellers, because it's not just this one person, they would kind of like delegate amongst each other and kind of like somehow put out little like plot hooks where like groups of people who are interested in this plot can kind of go chase that plot a bit and go work with one AST to kind of investigate or resolve that plot, and like this other group can might be more interested in this plot over here, so they work with this ST to kind of follow that plot. And so there's like a lot going on, and it's it takes a huge amount of effort on the part of the STs to kind of bring it all together.
So did it have like are there like quote unquote NPC characters, like storytellers who are just acting as?
Very occasionally that happened, yeah. But I think the most, yeah, I think I only saw like an NPC that was played physically. I only saw that once. But yeah, there was like one specific encounter where like the like Sabat big bad like vampires attacked the Camarilla, like nice like frou-frou vampires, and like it was a big encounter that people had like people standing in to play like the attackers and all that. But most of the time during these plots, the AST or ST that you're working with would just kind of like, you would kind of sit around maybe at a table or just kind of in a little circle, and they would describe what's going on, more like in tabletop.
Okay, that's interesting and cool.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's actually super cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of freedom that like they have there, and how they want to actually kind of tell the story and like structure the story. It's obviously more effort that goes into like costuming and stuff. If you want to costume like a big gargoyle like monster or something.
Right, and that method seems like it works better for situations where, if combat is a thing, you don't end up where the most physically intimidating person there is the one who always wins combat.
Well, I mean, I've seen communities where that's more or less the case. You know, boffer communities.
Yeah, the boffer stuff. I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's I've played one other game where it was vastly different from the Mind's Eye Society stuff I've just been talking about. And in the I think it's called Dystopia Rising. I played like one game. It's a lot of the same stuff. Like there's like a team of kind of storyteller, GM kind of people. Like people kind of have shifts, like playing or NPCing like zombies, because it's like a zombie apocalypse kind of setting. However, instead of 4 hours on a Saturday, it's a 3-day long game. where people would actually physically camp out and like just play this like dystopia, like apocalyptic setting.
So almost like an SCA event or something.
I don't know what you mean by SCA.
The Society for Creative Anachronism.
Okay. I haven't heard of.
People wear Renaissance garb and camp out, basically.
Yeah, something like that. But like the mechanics are a lot heavier in that Dystopia Rising game, where it actually incorporates like pseudo like combat, where like actual like gentle, light, safe like contact is made. People actually have like buffers and like foam, like air quotes, like heavy air quotes swords that are just like foam things. And so they have a lot more focus on like gameplay and systems and like HP and like all that stuff.
Did that have a storyteller game master kind of system, or
it it was a massive game compared with anything I've ever played, and I was only there for one weekend. It kind of wasn't the thing for me personally. I never had a weekend to set aside for that. Like after that, but the only way I can imagine they got it to work was they had to have some team of people working on it like that. Like there's no way. Like I think one thing that I witnessed happening was because when like there's so many people playing, everyone actually has like NPC shifts. And it's coming back to me now. The NPC shift I got that wasn't a zombie was like a like merchant kind of just like traveling through like the tent village or the little town, just with like just goods to sell that players could buy, and they're just like little events or big events that are kind of controlled by like an ST or game master kind of group that are like played by like NPC shift people. What happened in my NPC shift was I ended up getting robbed by players, and they took all of my goods that I was selling. And so it's this like even like little things that they did like that that gave like players just like options on how to kind of interact with the world around them, because I was representing the world kind of moving around the players and all that. I was an NPC.
That's wicked cool. And it being a 3-day event means that like players could stake out like specific locations and things. That sounds fun.
Yeah, that's I think that happened a lot, and it was totally like a lot to take in for me, like going from like 4 hours to 3 days. But it was a really cool thing. Unfortunately, I also like hurt my leg during the game, and so I couldn't enjoy it as much as I would have. But it was pretty cool.
You know, I think I just may have hit on something.
Go ahead.
Well, I think that most of the problems that we talked about earlier with text RP, and obviously all of these systems have their own unique issues. You know, tabletop stops and starts a lot. LARPing is expensive.
Oh yeah.
But I think that I think maybe the biggest problem with freeform text, right, is just the lack of a storyteller.
So that depends on the group, I think, because like in the kind of freeform text role plays we've been in lately, we have had like people step in to kind of present plots and run like plot events. And so I don't think it's necessarily always going to be a lack of a storyteller in text RP. Although there was a point that I had in mind where, like, even though you can have kind of DMs or like GMs stepping in to run certain plot events around all of the player-driven kind of drama, like there's still not as much like intimacy or like kind of close collaboration between a storyteller and a player as there is in tabletop.
I don't know about that necessarily. The tabletop can be kind of a adversarial experience between the players and the GM. Not in the sense that not in the sense that we're playing against each other, but in the sense that, you know, the storyteller can and will rocksfall your character if it makes sense.
It all comes down to the type of storyteller you have. Luckily, I've been blessed with some really good storytellers, GMs here recently.
Why, thank you.
Brandon, Distorted Truth of the Chat, Rail, he has been my Pathfinder GM in a Mummy's Mask campaign for the last several months, and he's been doing an excellent job. And I'm not just saying that because I'm hoping he doesn't crit me or, target my squishy mage the next time we have a session, but actually because he's doing an excellent job at it, and a better job than I ever did whenever I attempted to do it.
Yeah. I think that as an experiment, right? If I was going to run an experiment, what I would do is I would create a text RP like we've been doing, just where we're randomly creating stuff. I would create one of those if I had the time. I would create one of those and then not playing it. I would create one of those and then exist as the omniscient storyteller.
We have that option for some of the things we're working on, but I know you really want to do things in some of the ones we're working on.
Well, yeah, but just to see if there really is a way to improve it just by having a dedicated storyteller. Because I feel like that is the major difference. Like apart from the nonverbals and the time of posting, I feel like that's really a major, not necessarily detriment, but a difference between the experience on the tabletop and the experience in freeform, and the experience apparently in LARP, because I didn't actually know LARP had storytellers.
Yeah, I will say there is still some difference between kind of the way storytelling in LARP and storytelling in tabletop will work, because in tabletop you'll have a much smaller group than like 12 to 20 to 30 people. You can tell a much more focused story with your group, while in kind of the LARP it kind of has to be all over the place and it can't like be as focused really. You need to kind of offer options for like people who are more like into roleplay, or people more into like investigation, or like just people who want to make the beat stick characters and throw them at combat encounters and that kind of stuff.
I think we can agree from any perspective, from anyone who's ever been a storyteller, a DM, GM, or run a game in any way, shape, or form. Any plan you ever make, though, is never going to survive contact with the players.
You are absolutely right about that.
In my LARP, your face might not survive contact with the players.
Because you're giving them a foam sword and saying, have at it. By and large, though, it comes down to the type of people you're working with. I imagine a LARP, by and large, people are going to be there to make sure things go smooth.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Anyone in LARP, I think someone's echoing. Okay, I think it stopped. Anyone in LARP I've ever met were like experienced role players. There were no edgelord Naruto characters in any LARP game I've ever seen. Like it was people who were genuinely friendly and wanted to just get together and enjoy kind of collaborative storytelling and such.
And then when it comes to having an actual tabletop game, whether it's your various World of Darkness, your D&D, your Pathfinder, your Dark Heresy, anything that's a small, intimate group setting, you're essentially playing these games either at a store where there are other people, or there's somebody, an owner of the store there to kind of break up anything, or you're playing at somebody's house and you're going to invite an asshole into your house to play a game with you. I think the biggest area for RP for roleplay where you run into the edgelords, the assholes, the people who are going to just be terrible people are in the freeform online RPs.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of reasons for that. But the primary one, probably...
anonymity.
I don't think it's even that, honestly. And the reason I don't think it's even that is because a lot of those people, you know who you are. A lot of those people play those characters, again, you know who you are, because they honestly think it's cool. And I can understand why, It's not that they are bad, right? Playing an edgelord is, in fact, fun. It's just... you get over that.
Fun.
Like, it's something that you grow out of. And I think that the reason you run into those people so much more often online than you do, in your friend group, or even, like, in other communities, is just because they are not, or they have not had the experience of role-playing in the same room as somebody, and seeing, for example, the involuntary eye roll.
Or when they start trying to be all cocky and everything, the rather large person who probably played sports in high school and has now adopted a nerd lifestyle, just sitting there, trying not to break his pen as the character goes on and on and on about the random bullshit.
Right. That's all I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the reason you run into that more often in text roleplay is just because the people playing text roleplay have not roleplayed in the same room as other people.
Right. They haven't, as in the words of a coach I had once, they haven't had a come to Jesus meeting, regardless of it.
Right. I feel like all of us have improved our text roleplay immensely just by pure dint of talking to each other in a different roleplay setting.
Oh,
Absolutely. And just to read out, wait, which boss were we supposed to talk to, Rail? God damn it. He's only going to mention this now, and he's never going to tell me what it was. I'm sorry.
So, to explain what's going on there, Distorted Truth says in my stream chat, back to the subject of plans dying on impact with the players, you guys were supposed to talk to that boss that one time.
He will never tell me which one it was just to fuck with me.
Oh, I never assume my players are going to talk to somebody.
Well, to be fair, you have my characters in your game.
I just assume that any character I make is going to get attacked on sight, so if anyone actually has to say words, I make it so you can't attack them while they say words.
Yeah, and how? Like that one time, most recently.
For example, yes.
Really?
Anyway.
I had a... Damn it, hold on. Let me think for a second. I had a topic on the broach, but I forgot what it was.
Excellent. Think about it for a second.
Also, on the topic of just keeping up with the topic of running into the edgelord style characters in online RP. Like you said, by and large, the first time that they play an actual game of Pathfinder D&D, regardless of whether or not it's actually in person, because I made much better characters after my first session of 3.5 D&D over Skype, my character started improving by a significant margin. But regardless, I think the biggest issue you run into, though, with the online roleplay is the fact that you have all these people who think the edgelord characters are cool, and they end up in areas where they're essentially in an echo chamber of like, oh yeah, this is cool, and it just becomes, I'm going to out edgelord you by being more edgelord than edgelord.
Right, although again, this is really more of a topic for the worst characters we've made, which is now our next episode because it's come up 4 times.
So essentially what we've discovered at this point is our next topic of discussion is just going to be whatever hits the head. Whatever
that is what happened last time.
Whatever we hit the nail on the head of the most.
Yeah, it definitely seems like what's going to happen. Anyway, I also wanted to address, and this is going to involve another question for Pat. I wanted to address the question of pacing. So, in text, pacing tends to be pretty slow. For better for worse. I like that it's slow most of the time. Occasionally, it sucks. But pacing tends to be slower.
Anywhere between 5 minutes and 3 weeks, depending on which group you're playing with.
Right. Well, I'm not saying. I'm actually not talking about the time per post. That's not actually what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the pacing of the story, because in text you end up having these long in-depth conversations that are great. You know, they really bring a lot of character to the fore, and they really explore how the character feels about the situation and what exactly the character's doing with their time and what exactly is happening at any given moment.
Right, but that's mainly because I think you have more time with text roleplay, because you can sit there and you don't have to respond immediately. You don't have somebody standing across from you or sitting at a table that are waiting on you. You can take 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes to type something out.
Right. I'm just pointing out that the pacing, like even when you run what is like meant to be, or what would be in tabletop, a fairly quick and easy dungeon crawl, it becomes a 2 to 3 day event when you're doing it in text.
Right, because you always end up with those players who are going to be like, well, I'm at the next door now. Well, somebody check it for traps, and somebody be ready to breach the room, and just hit it methodically.
Yeah, everyone's ready to go in tabletop.
Right. Like
there's literally been a case in one of the games that it wasn't Rail who ran it. It was mine, Rail's mutual friend, Ja. Yep, that's it. Set up with a ballista. A tabletop game that me and Rail played in with our friends Donnie and Ja, where it was a 3-5 campaign, and we went through each room clearing it like a fucking SWAT team. We took we're going to check for traps, and the dwarf suddenly had a crossbow, and there was a minotaur involved. And so, but that just, you got that going on. You just say, okay, so my character does this, and you roll for it and go on from there. Where in text RP, you've got to have one person sets up and says what they're going to do, and then you have the next and the next and the next, and you go through the rounds unless you're doing the weird whoever post first goes. You just have to wait for the setup for each character to come through.
And sometimes a character doesn't have a specific thing to do in that very moment, but like it's still their turn to post. They got to post anyway.
Right.
So, correct, Rail. It wasn't a crossbow. It was a fucking ballista, and we named it Bianca because that's how long ago this particular game was.
And if that happens in tabletop, right, where initiative has already been rolled and everyone has to go around saying what they do with the situation, that person can just say, well, I hold action.
Correct.
and not have to worry about, like...
Describing their character stands there
Right.
and observes the rock in front of them.
And, you know, when you are text role-playing, you can do the equivalent of holding action.
Pass me here. I'll pass.
Yeah, pass. You can pass. You can say, I don't need to post this round. That's fine. But the result of all that is that the pacing ends up being slower, for better or for worse. And what I wanted to ask Pat about was in the pacing of that vampire game.
So the pacing of the story, which is what your focus on.
Yeah, narrative pacing.
Your focus was, yeah. It was actually closer to what I've seen in or experienced in text roleplay. Because I think it's a difference in like the kind of story or like the amount of focus on the story, because in tabletop you have your close-knit little group that's like always doing stuff together, more or less, and like they're always doing this and like these little events and adventures, but with the like structure of the story in LARP is very much like text, in that the same way in text, like even if you have an ST or a DM like running plot events, it's just going to be for like a kind of small group of people. You're not going to run a story event that involves 30 people in a combat at once. That would be an absolute horrible nightmare.
And yet we have done so in the various groups we've been a part of.
Oh my god. I don't even want to think about that, or what that was like. But like I mentioned in kind of what would happen in a lot of just given games for a night, I would hang around in character as my like neonate like dumb gangrel, and just kind of chat with people in character for like 3 hours or 4 hours. And sometimes like I would kind of forge in character relationships and like basically have the same sort of like conversations and character building you would get from the kind of downtime like non-story event roleplay you get from text, where you have character A and B, or this group of like 1, 2, 3, 4 characters like in this little scene in a conversation.
Oh, that reminds me.
I also have a topic I want to bring up, but you go ahead, Brandon.
Okay, keep your topic in mind because this will be quick. That reminds me, I have technically LARPed before.
Go on.
Okay, so I was at Gen Con in 2012, 2011?
An age ago.
An age ago. I was at Gen Con, and they did this, like, it was really cool. It was this, like, real-life dungeon crawl thing, where, like, they had set up this dungeon that they made that had, you know, traps, and it had puzzles, and it had, like, there was a hole you had to reach in that had that I thought would have a key in it. So I told our rogue to reach in there and get the key, but no, it wasn't a key. It was spiders.
I don't know how I knew it was spiders when you were describing that. I knew it was going to be spiders.
Did you have to sign a waiver to do this? Because it sounds like you'd have.
Actually, it wasn't much of a waiver, and they weren't real spiders, but.
Oh.
Anyway, it was like, but the ambiance was really good, and we had gotten most of the way through the dungeon, and we'd reached the final boss. But there was a thing, right? because it was a major event, you only had a set amount of time to get through each room. So we're fighting the boss, and by fighting the boss I mean throwing dice at him, because that's just how this works. So as we're fighting the boss, I realize that we are basically out of time. We only had like 5 minutes to begin with in this room, and we were at like minute 450. So I looked at our game master, and I said, what if we just ran away? He did not have a response to that, apart from, well, can anyone pick this lock? Conveniently, I still had a rogue.
Despite the spiders.
Despite the spiders. So basically the end result of this little dungeon crawl that we did was that we bravely ran away from the final boss, thus surviving the dungeon and being allowed to keep our loot.
Bravely brave Sir Robin ran away.
The worst part is, I was a paladin. I was a paladin who successfully run away from the final boss.
So, two things. Not after that session. You had to have failed some sort of oath check after that and fell.
Well, not every paladin has to be a lawful stupid paladin.
That is true.
You can be a paladin who wants to survive to do good tomorrow. Would be
fair
fine.
enough.
So,
Fair enough. But you also had the fact where I imagine at that point you had to tell the rogue, hey, go pick that lock.
Yep.
After you told him to stick his hand into the hole with spiders.
Yep. But so yes, I have technically LARPed for about an hour.
Technically what you did is you did a LARP in a D&D inspired escape room.
Yeah, it was fun. It was lots of fun.
I want to do one of these things now. I wish to do this thing you said.
Anyway, before I went off on that little derail tangent, you had a point that you wanted to make.
Well, not so much a point. I had a question concerning LARPing, because I used to see it pop up a lot when, in the dark days before I found the group I'm currently a part of, and I've seen it in other situations with from stories and stuff I've read. Okay, yeah, fair enough. Hey, Ben. My topic was, what I want to bring up was, occasionally you have situations in freeform roleplay where people people after a while, when they interact with the character enough, they eventually start forming relationships, and in tabletop, the same thing happens. I imagine that's a thing that sometimes comes up in LARPing as well. Where
I think that happens in LARP too. Sometimes like people who are actually together out of character might also end up being together in character. Like that might happen. But that I don't have any experience with that. Personally, I didn't. I never did enough LARPing to. Get
to see that come up and be an issue.
Yeah.
Okay.
And yeah, it could be an issue with where it could potentially be more an issue than with text or something, if someone wants to be like a romantic in character or something, but the other person doesn't want to, or that might be a whole different can of worms to talk about on some far future discussion. I don't know.
Right. Like I said, that thought just occurred to me where we were discussing the previous topic. So it's just that thing occurs to me, and that's something else that occurs from the various modes of role play. It's more of a thing in text-based, I imagine, because as we've been over, it's a situation where people you can't determine what a person's intentions are via text because it's text.
Although in text they can just, tell you their intentions.
Yeah, and that can happen too in LARP because like in whatever LARP game there is, like if it's a good LARP game, there's going to be some kind of nonverbal signal. They're like you're crossing your fingers or like hand on your head or something that means like I'm being out of character right now, and
Right.
and you can always say something out of character if need be.
I imagine it's a similar situation to how they describe the early seasons of Game of Thrones with why can't I remember his name? Khal Drogo with Khaleesi. I can't remember the actors' names for the life of me. Jason Momoa and I can't remember the actress who played Khaleesi.
Daenerys Targaryen.
Daenerys Targaryen, but I can't remember the actress's name.
Me either. Emilia Clarke.
That's it, Emilia Clarke, where like they had those intense scenes in the beginning of Game of Thrones, and just afterwards, Jason Momoa would just be extremely apologetic and everything, and just this big burly man just going over, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. I imagine it'd be a similar situation to that in LARPing, where it's just like, okay, so you do the hand symbols, like, okay, so this is what I'm planning on, and then afterwards, just I'm so sorry, so on and so forth.
Yeah, well, yeah, I have that kind of stuff. I don't know what you're specifically like referencing in Game of Thrones, but I think I get the idea. And that, like, like whether it's like relationship stuff, I haven't.
Intense scenes that are a bit iffy, and
stuff that can make people uncomfortable.
Right. In text-based RP,
yeah.
You can always apologize and such as that. In tabletop RP, you're essentially just playing with the people at the table, so on and so forth. I imagine in LARP, you have to have, similar situations such as that.
Yeah. Yeah, in LARP, either it's like after the game, or if it's like right after the scene, people are kind of like breaking out of that particular scene to go do like other stuff. Then like you. Like, and it was like a really intense scene that kind of put you on the spot a bit, or whatever the situation was. Like I've had like situations where I was like put on the spot in character, or I was like literally my character was being tried to like see if they need to be destroyed for like breaking the masquerade. It was very fun. But like afterward, like I would have like people like approach me and like just do the out of character sign. They'd be like it was a really great scene, but like I'm sorry, like and they might be apologetic, or they might be like you did really great, thanks for like putting up with it, or just some kind of like meta communication about the scene. Like that happens all the time still,
right,
from what I've experienced.
And I imagine that's a bigger thing that comes up with maturity with role playing.
Yeah, that's really a part of like kind of what people you role play with, and like mature, like experienced role players who understand that like no matter what the game or situation is, it's people want to have fun and have fun making stories together.
I think it's a big thing, like a mark of a role player who's starting as a neonate, as it were, using a vampire term. Neonate or role player, and eventually when you start progressing and growing as a role player, you start being able to accept things that happen to your character. It's just like, oh no, I completely understand, like you had to remove my character's hand for this specific scene and go on from there.
Oh yeah, okay, Steve.
No, that's not what I'm getting at. That's old.
This will all be brought up in the next episode.
Not even remotely what I was referring to, but
yeah, no, I do get what you're referring to though, and I've noticed that a similar thing happened on the tabletop where like, and I'm the one who did it, right? Because I'm the storyteller, so it was me. This was all me. I'm definitely the one who just did that to that person, and then I have to sit there like, yeah, that was a thing that happened, and I want to know how you guys feel about that because I don't feel very good.
I know some of the scenes you're referring to, actually.
Right, right.
Oh yeah.
It's a thing that's gonna happen in roleplay, that you're going to get in a situation that I honestly sickened myself in the description of.
I just know there's been like some emotional shit in our Genius game,
Phoebe's
but
asking
it's
which
all
scene in
been
particular,
fun.
Brandon.
What? I'm sorry, you guys were talking over each other.
Phoebe's asking which scene in particular.
Just start with black mud tentacles and go from there.
Yep. A lot of the thesis statements, this is just a Genius statement. A lot of the progression you have to make in the Genius game for character progression get very, very intimate with the characters.
That's true. I honestly consider a thesis to be something of a failure if by the end of it the character doesn't feel like a complete badass and or a broken shell.
That's a very good way of putting it, Brandon.
Yeah, I thought that might be the case.
Which means my character's first thesis was a bit of a failure because he didn't feel like much of a broken shell, just a badass.
I did say and or.
But like, I think the point I was trying to make is eventually you have to, regardless of the mode of roleplay you're doing, you eventually have to accept the fact that something's going to happen to your character. And once you can accept that and move on, you've grown as a role player and you've essentially become a veteran at that point.
Yes, true. And it really is something that just happens regardless of the type of roleplay you're doing, I guess. Actually, that brings up another question about LARPing that I'm going to ask Pat.
Mm-hmm.
When you go to multiple sessions, like, okay, what is a character's lifespan in your Vampire the Masquerade, or in that Vampire the Masquerade game?
Ooh, good question.
So, a character's lifespan, do you mean just how long the character lasts
Yeah, pretty much.
before they are killed?
Not killed
out of
necessarily,
play,
or
or
retired, or how long
Okay.
do you play the same character in that game? Because you play once a month for 4 hours.
Let's see. So I don't think I can give a very accurate representation of that. But let's see. For each game I played the Vampire the Masquerade game and then a crossover game in which I played a changeling. Let's see, that Gangrel character I played, I think, about a year and a half, or I think close to the full 2 years.
Oh my god!
And and believe me, it's really slow burn, kind of very like downtime, like lots of just like chit chat in character sort of role play. Like there are times I can say that like I played like in character as like vampires, like me and like 8 other people playing vampires that just played the game Never Have I Ever, like in character, like just like some kind of like kids game, like as kind of a funny in character thing that someone brought up in character.
God, that brings into perspective how long some of my characters have been alive. Not so much in the forum roleplay, because I've had characters that have lived for years in freeform RP text-based, but in terms of tabletop, or since I haven't done LARP, in terms of table, I haven't had a character that really has existed for more than, I think my Genius character is the longest character I've had exist at this point. Followed quickly by my Pathfinder character and by Rail.
Yeah, so it just because the pacing's so very slow in the LARP, at least the games I've played in.
It feels like
or
it
at least
really would be in any game.
Yeah, at least in the Vampire the Masquerade game, the pacing was slower, because I think there was actually more action happening in that crossover game, and it would take a while to actually explain like the super creative premise that they had for that game, but and I think that game was paced a bit faster because there was more frequent story beats. But for the vampire game specifically, there would be those nights I would just chat with people in character, kind of flesh out my own character. I played chess in character with someone else once. I think I've seen people play Magic the Gathering in character at a Vampire the Masquerade game, LARP.
That's awesome.
That sounds like the single nerdiest thing I have ever heard.
Doesn't it? It was amazing to behold.
Behold, they are amazing.
They are amazing. So my question is this. I think you might have touched on it earlier, but I just want to get in terms of a frame of reference for time. The majority of my games, when they come currently, you guys know my frame of reference is for this. My Genius game's every 2 weeks, and my Pathfinder's game is every 2 weeks. So it's literally on my off weeks I play Pathfinder, and then I play Genius on the next week. So the Vampire game is going every weekend, right?
Are you saying the LARP?
Yeah, the LARP. It's every weekend, 4 hours on a Saturday.
No, it's once a month.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, so it's also stretched over a longer period of time. So actually, I would say that the vampire LARP I did, as in terms of number of sessions, I would say is comparable to the number of sessions I've played in Brandon's Genius game with my one character I have in the Genius game.
I was about to say, you were about to make me and Rail cry just on the sheer dint of you've got a weekly game going on for 2 years. That's nothing
no.
accomplished yet.
That would be just a wondrous feat.
Weekly games are not possible.
Not with the schedule I have.
Yeah, that's hard enough for a tabletop.
Which, to bring us back to topic just a little bit, actually is an advantage of text RP.
Oh yeah, we can.
You just shoot a message off whenever you feel like it.
Oh, absolutely. In text-based RP, you can have multiple scenes going at once if you're good at multitasking. Just I'm gonna post here in this particular room, and this scene is also going on concurrently. So you can get a lot more done. It's just trying your storyteller, your GM, and all your players together is a bit like wrangling cats sometimes. And as Rail said, yes, your soul would probably die if you got a weekly game going, Rail. But you shouldn't complain because you play more games than I do. So yeah.
But this is why I run my games in a halfway house. Not literally, but this is why I run my games in a halfway house. My games take place on Discord, where we talk about things, and people tell me what their character does, and then we roll dice in Discord. But that's not all it is, because our games also have those special extra rooms where people can text at each other.
We can split up the group, and that's what I love about the whole concept we have for tabletop over Skype or Discord. You can split up the group if need be, like we've done several times now. Okay, so you split the party, and if you do it at in person at tabletop, it's well, we split the party, but I'm going to have to split my focus between this group and this group. Whereas we've done before, literally is okay, so the storyteller's going to go off with these characters, and the other characters are left to discuss, and the GM or storyteller check in and provide things as need be, and it just makes things feel a bit more dynamic.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, your mode of roleplay is basically going to be involved mostly with what your group needs. Like, I have played in a game that existed in this weird halfway house between tabletop and LARP,
Right.
where most of the time, yeah, we were sitting around a table rolling dice, but then we'd go out for a smoke, say, and
Right.
we would just have like a water cooler conversation in character.
Water cooler conversation in character. That's basically what is happening in like a lot of my LARP games I've
Right,
had.
right.
That's just a good way to put it. Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, it's exactly that. Like, it's all about what is going to work best in your group and your game. Because we've talked about, like, we may have ragged on text roleplay pretty hard over the course of this thing, but it still has its important time and place. It's still extremely valuable, and if it works for your group, use it.
I mean, in theory, if you think about it, any kind of live-action vampire role play, you could, in theory, have conversations in character, in text or phone call, between stuff going on, like in between games and such.
That happens. There's downtime roleplay where I've done text roleplay during like downtime, like between LARP games, where it would just be like in an email. And so, like, it's definitely that text roleplay has its like strength, and it is. I found it to be a really great supplement to, like if it's not just on its own, which is enjoyable enough, it can like supplement LARP or tabletop really well.
And that's actually, yeah, that's almost literally what I was going to say. It is a perfect supplement to any game type.
I think the absolute perfect form of role play at this point from this conversation is you have these situations where the entire group gets together and for the live action role play of everything. Then you have these sessions where dice are thrown every couple of weeks. And then between that, you have like the text-based role play. So you can just filter all this in together and just, you end up in a situation where there's never a time where you can't play a character that you love.
So what you're saying is we just need to create a system that uses all of these.
Well, I mean, essentially what it would be is all it would take is all of your genius characters being able to get together on the actual game session day for tabletop RP, and if you can have a strange, eerie building setup where you can go and do the exploration and everything, you can do the actual LARP function of it, and then in between everything, you have the text-based stuff.
God, if I had the time in my life, I would run that. That sounds amazing.
God, if all of us weren't scattered to the four corners of the world.
That is
No,
also
I feel
true.
like I need that now. Yeah.
Although, being scattered to the four corners of the world does not stop you from coming to my Halloween party.
Oh, no, I'm coming to your Halloween party. That's
I know.
a given. I think Phoebe's added something to the chat.
Okay, so Phoebe says, honestly, I enjoyed Text RP the most till you showed me the World of Darkness setting style and respected capability over role results interpersonally. Oh, respected capacity over role results capability. Respected capability over role results interpersonally. I have failed my save against Bourbon.
I have not yet, so yay.
Okay. Anyway. Honestly, I enjoyed Text RP the most till you showed me the World of Darkness setting style and respected capability over role results interpersonally. Now they're kind of equal. Yeah, I think that's really where we kind of ended up over the course of this, that these modes all have their place.
Absolutely.
There's one thing I was wondering if you wanted to touch on it all, Brandon, and
Sure.
I don't know if you wanted to talk about like gameplay mechanics in these different modes of roleplay.
Yeah, I suppose we can. Actually, yeah, let's, because we've got time. So, as you probably know, when you're tabletop role-playing, you throw dice. There's Different systems, different rules, different stats, character stats. But at the end of the day, you're throwing dice. There is not a tabletop role-playing system that does not involve throwing dice. In freeform, in text RP, it's not... Often you do throw dice. Like, often there will be some kind of basic dice system that just basically works as kind of a pass-fail kind of thing. But it's very rare that a character in a text RP is going to have stats, and it's very rare that a character in a text RP is going to be rolling any kind of modified dice. If you're rolling a dice, it's a naked dice.
Luckily, we've developed systems here recently that kind of take that into consideration, and we can do multiple things with it. But that's what you want with it.
Yeah. But in text roleplay, it is very rare that you throw dice at all. It's just dice are not... Freeform roleplay is well known for having very few rules, which the end result of that is Son Goku fighting a portal mage in the arena and nobody winning. That is what happens.
Well, what usually ends up in those situations is somebody spends 30 minutes typing up 8 paragraphs worth of stuff and then they have to leave.
Yes, also true. My point is, there are no rules in text RP, so unless you have a good, cohesive group that is capable of agreeing to certain stipulations, you end up with a giant cluster.
Correct.
Which, again, if you have a group that has an agreed upon method, that's fine. That's good. It'll work. But if you're trying to play with randos on the internet, and in fact, the problem with roleplay, all roleplay, is randos on the internet. You just end up in a situation. But yeah, so freeform roleplay, barely any rules. Sometimes no rules. Tabletop, you got books. The books have rules. You follow the rules in the books unless your GM tells you that we're not following the rules in the books today, in which case you do what he says because he's the boss. What was the system? What, Steve?
Oh, no, I just said right.
Right. What was the system in LARP like?
So I've been waiting for you to ask me that because I was kind of leading you to ask about that, getting into this topic. So it is actually different in the 2 games that I've played. I've the 2 Mind's Eye Society games I've played, the World of Darkness games. The crossover game was more mechanics heavy, and we actually just used the same tabletop rules that were in the New World of Darkness books. And so we rolled dice. A lot of the times we had like a dice rolling like app on our phones just for convenience.
Oh, you weren't walking around with a pocket full of D10s?
Yeah, and sometimes we would be kind of sitting around a place that didn't have like a very flat surface to roll dice on, like we might be outside. It's more dynamic and kind of where you end up standing around in the roleplay. However, in the Vampire the Masquerade game, I think the system that we used was called By Night Studios, which was like an adaptation of World of Darkness mechanics. It was very simplified, and anytime we had to like test like a skill pool or like test like an action or something against something, we would play rock, paper, scissors, either against another player or against an ST. And it was a very simplified system where if you won the rock, paper, scissors, generally you would win unless like maybe they blew willpower or something and they like got a retest, and so you'd play rock, paper, scissors really quick again. But if you were to tie, then that's when like you would compare like your pool of like I have this much, like this many dots in this skill, this many dots in this like attribute, and if my pool's higher than yours and we tie, then like I succeed in my action in the test. And so there were no dice in the By Night Studios rule set. And so it was basically to just make the game go a lot faster. It was a much more popular kind of larger game with more people in it than that crossover game. And so if you have a big mass combat and you have all these cats, all these players to herd, you want things to go as smoothly as possible. And that's kind of the strength of that system, is that it is less it's a lot more wieldy. You can go through actions more intuitively and efficiently once you kind of okay, test 1, 2, 3, rock or whatever, and that would be it.
Man, I would not do very well at that system.
You're terrible at rock, paper, scissors?
I only throw rock.
I only throw scissors. Oh. You would beat me every time. There was a session where I...
Two side jokes to make really quickly. Brandon beat me to the joke about players being referred to as cats from here on out. And also, a pocket full of D10s is the name of my next solo alternative album. That will never be released.
A pocket full of D10s could have been the name of this podcast.
I like Save versus Bourbon because it means I get to drink bourbon every time we have a session.
Yeah, but you could do that regardless of what the title was.
Yeah, but at the end of it, we get to... I think we need just a emote for, as you said earlier, I failed my Save versus Bourbon.
I did. I failed it badly. So, talking about Pocket Full of Saves, talking about the systems in the LARP. So, in one sense, it's exactly the same as tabletop, right? Because you're just playing with the tabletop rules.
Yeah, and that's always an option.
I guess technically you could run a text RP that just used the World of Darkness rules.
Right, yeah, our friend Amber is running a text RP, Wayfar, that's actually using rules out of a tabletop system.
Yeah.
So she's doing exactly that.
Right.
Compared to Endurance, which is just Stellaris with a dice system now.
It's really FTL with a dice system.
I like to think of it as Stellaris mixed with FTL mixed with a dice system, but that's just me.
And then the other game is just again, rock, paper, scissors. So you can see the difference in priorities, right? Because on the one hand, you've got stats, rules, dice. You're playing the game the way the game is intended to be played. On the other hand, you've got, well, how are we going to solve this dispute? Paper, rock, scissors. Literally the fastest, easiest method. And what's the result of that? The result of that is that option 2 gets a faster, snappier RP that doesn't really have any depth to it because you're just playing rock, paper, scissors. Although, you could really argue that rock, paper, scissors is a fairly deep game.
Yeah, that's certainly another deep discussion that we get into.
Even before you add lizards and Spock.
Or Dynamite, or Typhoon.
Or Lavos.
Or Gun.
Lavos in rock, paper, scissors?
Yeah.
I'm unfamiliar with that one. Please explain.
Lavos, from Chrono Trigger?
Yes, but what's... Please explain how that works.
It's precisely the same as throwing Volcano.
Ah.
It would be better than Volcano. Lavos would beat Volcano.
Yeah, specifically. Anyway. So when you think about the rules, right? The actual rules, and storytellers know this. Everybody who runs a game, we all know this. When you are using rules, they are literally only as useful as you want them to be. There comes a point where you fudge the dice, or you don't roll for something you probably should have rolled for based on the rules of the game, or you just overpower a middling roll. Like, you tell your player to roll to break something down, for example, and they get a middling result, and you just tell them no. That happens.
It does, and that brings me to that actually has a brainwave for me. Just due to my experience dealing with my group with Rail and everything else. In text-based roleplay, regardless of whatever system you use, if you use dice, if you use various accepted modes of fighting, so on and so forth, everything's out in the open. Everybody knows what happened. And the same for LARPing. You've got the app on your phone, you've got rock, paper, scissors, you've got this, that, and the other. And, the storytellers can step in and determine what actually happens. I think when it comes to tabletop RP, or tabletop role-playing games, it's a bit more distracted, a bit more intense when it comes to rolling dice, because, as a rule, Dungeons & Dragons has the DM screen where you can roll your dice behind it, and you don't have to tell the players what you're rolling.
I have never used a DM screen.
I know for a fact that depending on which game we're going for in D&D games, especially when Rail's running, sometimes the dice rolls are hidden and sometimes they're naked. Eventually, they end up having to be, or not naked, but exposed to everybody. They end up having to be exposed because crits just happen so often, and Rail just has to prove that literally he is throwing 20s to crit the fucking characters every round of combat.
I mean, I wouldn't show you that. I'd just be like, oh, you took 50 damage. What? Why? Well, because that's what the attack hit you for.
I mean, it's not a problem so much, except when it happens at least 5 times a session.
Okay, we'll have a whole other episode about the dice gods.
I've started sacrificing to Nuffle.
I would say I'm surprised, but it would be a lie.
Fair enough.
But yeah, so the rules kind of end up working like the modes themselves. You use what your group needs at a given moment and just call it good. Because at the end of the day, nobody who is having fun with the game is following the books 100%, right?
At the end of the day, it's just all about, getting together, having fun, making a story together.
Yeah, it's about creating a fun time for everyone.
And memorable time, and memorable moments.
The only time I think I can see where the books come into play every single time is if you have any sort of official event, either commanded by White Wolf or Wizards of the Coast, or you just have a table full of rules lawyers.
A table full of rules lawyers can be its own kind of fun, but that'll be a story for another day, I think.
Uh-huh.
And we've been talking about this for a solid 2 hours, so I think that unless you guys have any additional points to make,
I don't really have any more additional points to make, except earlier I did come up with the idea of which particular game system works for which particular mode of roleplay.
Ooh, yes, let's talk about that, yes.
This is just going to be a... What about role-playing strictly in video game MMOs? Okay, so maybe, Brandon, we're going to be here a little bit longer, because that's an interesting topic, too.
Yeah, I think that we are now extending our podcast. Everyone open another drink!
I like it. That's just a whole nother kettle of fish there, Phoebe.
We'll talk about role playing in MMO in video game MMOs. We will talk about that. Yes, we will. But Steve, systems and modes, please enlighten us.
Systems and modes. So this is the theory that the thought that came to me probably about an hour ago. I forget when I sent the message, but it just comes up as this. In terms of every system we've discovered, whether it's freeform text-based with a dice system, straight up tabletop over a VoIP unit, or LARPing. In your guys' opinion, and of the chat, of course, which system do you think works best for which mode?
Okay, so I'm going to state that the best the best system for tabletop is D20.
Yeah, D20 would probably be the best system for just tabletop in general, unless you're getting into World of Darkness stuff. But D20 is something simple. When you look at the whole...
Wow, I don't know about simple. You haven't seen the stack of books I've got.
Well, so let's just look at this. You're talking about naked D20. D20 is a dice that you can get from your local comic book store, game shop, whatever. You get a D20. Those are easy to come by. If you're just doing like a naked D20, that's...
No, that's not what I mean. That's not what I mean. D20 system means...
Pathfinder D&D system where you...
Wizard Coast.
Right. So, like, just in terms of, like, I think in text-based RP, just a regular naked D20 without all the modifiers is probably one of the better systems. And then you can add in things from there to make it this, that, or the other. In terms of tabletop RP, yeah, D20 is probably the better system because despite what it says, it's not just a naked 20-sided dice.
I might disagree on what is the best system for tabletop, and I think it might kind of fall to my preference for World of Darkness that I've kind of developed over the years, and I think it just falls to differences between World of Darkness and D&D, which obviously you covered the last show.
Right. In the last episode, we talked about what makes the World of Darkness system, or the White Wolf system, I guess, such a good system for tabletop. It's just that, even with all that in mind, D20 has a special place in our hearts that is never going away.
I love the D10 system from White Wolf. I think it's spectacular, and literally all you need is just a bunch of D10s.
I love both systems, like D&D, Pathfinder, to World of Darkness. Like, I am super psyched and jazzed to play any of those systems.
Right, but I think what Brandon's going with, and I think he swayed me to his side on this, is when you have the D20 system, sure, you've got the 20-side dice for all your hit rolls and all so on and so forth. But then you get, your stat bases. You could do point buy in D&D or Pathfinder, or you could roll 3d6 and whatever you have, and those are your stats, and you have to make those work. And then you've got like your regular weapons are going to do d6 damage, so on and so forth. So you have to have more dice, but it adds a bit more randomness to it. It's not just like, well, you succeeded this check, so then this person takes damage on like in the White Wolf system. Or like, well, you done damage. Well, now you're throwing an acid splash at somebody, so here, just throw a D4.
Right. And we're not going to argue too much about this because at the end of the day, they are both amazing on tabletop, and they're fundamentally different games with different purposes for existence.
Correct.
But I do want to know, what system worked best in LARP?
So I think what I had the most fun with was actually the untouched World of Darkness system. And I think it's just everyone kind of knew their game mechanics well enough that it flowed. Like, it like even though we didn't like we were like a dynamic group moving around everywhere, whenever there was actually a like encounter or some kind of something we had to roll for, we were like sneaking into the place to get the thing, or whatever it was, we had our little phone apps with our dice, and we had like our pools, like either memorized or written down. We knew like what our like powers, what our stuff, what our things were, and I actually enjoyed that better than the rock paper scissors. But that might be my preference, because I kind of enjoyed that kind of more in depth mechanical stuff.
Right.
Like I
Rock,
still
paper,
really
sorry.
yeah, I was just saying I still really enjoyed the rock paper scissors games, because that like sometimes that's all you need, and that like when you have huge games, I think it might really depend on the game size that you have, because in the Vampire the Masquerade, it's a hugely popular game. It's like the most popular game in like probably any city. People just love their Vampire the Masquerade, um, and like like dozens of people would show up for that game, and sometimes encounters got kind of big, and if we tried to resolve it with the like D10 system from World of Darkness, then that would be a nightmare. But in the kind of smaller crossover game where I had the Changeling, I think it still worked well enough. We like still had small enough groups of like little like kind of task forces of like little like 3, 4, or 5 people at a time in one little group doing one thing with one assistant storyteller, and the regular dice system worked just fine. And so I think it depends on the size of the game, like I said.
I am curious about one. I got one question.
Mm-hmm.
What if you couldn't agree on which rule to use? Who had the rule book?
So are you saying between rock paper scissors and dice?
No, in dice, just specifically in the World of Darkness game where you're playing with the tabletop rules.
So
You said most of the stuff was written down or remembered, but what if you had to look at the rule book? Who had the rule book?
So I don't know who all they belong to, but every time I showed up to the crossover game, there was a big stack of every New World of Darkness rulebook that was like sanctioned for the game, and we could like always go and look up like in the rules like what that was, and also what I personally did and what I know a lot of other people did was they had like a copy of like a PDF on their phone in addition to that, which I guess isn't as, I don't know, it didn't really come up much in the game as far as my experience. I don't know, maybe there are some times in that kind of situation where it like kind of like halts gameplay a little bit, but I didn't experience that personally. I think everyone in the game was pretty like they were ready to do their thing, and like they knew their stuff.
Fair enough.
Which that's all well. That's perfectly fine. But this just goes back to the whole topic Brandon brought up earlier of when it comes to role playing games and such. There's a bit of an elitism aspect to it. That's fine and dandy until you have like a new player who's just like, well, I want to get involved with the Vampire the Masquerade live action role play. I've heard about it, seen about it, so on and so forth. I know it doesn't happen very often, but inevitably it does. You have somebody who comes in who doesn't really know the system very well.
I can't imagine. Okay, one would hope that the result there was that the people who knew what they were doing would just help.
Woman hope, yes. But humanity on its own is, you can't guarantee that.
Any experience I've had in LARP, people were extremely helpful to new players.
That is good.
So that, like, Mind's Eye Society really impressed me in that respect, and in addition to just how much effort it takes to kind of organize such huge games. And so my experience there was very good and positive.
What it's sounding like in terms of actual like tabletop RP is like the D20 system might be better, but for terms of live action roleplay, something like the D10 system for White Wolf is much better, because then all you have to worry about is throwing naked D10s and comparing your stats and so on and so forth. Or
Yeah. I think if you tried to do D20 in a LARP setting, that would be that would turn into a big mess.
It would be a nightmare. Just a nightmare.
At which point you have a gang roll be like, well, I'm going to use my, I can't remember the name of the spell. I play a gang roll. I can't remember the name of the actual ability where you have the blood claws where you do ag damage.
Yeah,
Feral claws.
So yeah, like I imagine if you had a D20 system set up for that, they'd have to keep track of like D6s and so on and so forth. If it was a D20 setup. Whereas if it's a D10, it's just like, yeah, here you go.
Yeah. In terms of freeform, the naked D20 system works fairly well. I just sometimes wish there was more depth.
Well, to be fair, we've added more depth in our stuff, but
That's true. We are slowly adding depth.
Yeah, one thing that I can mention that I've seen before is a purely text-based roleplay. It was on a Discord server I happened upon that adapted the rules of Dark Souls into a text-based roleplay.
Can you send us a link for this?
I absolutely will. I'll look it up in a second, but it was very like to the book or just to the letter, like translated rules for most of the weapons in Dark Souls, all of the stats, like everything, and how they actually like interact and like translate into like playing a text game.
But can I kick Lautrec off a cliff?
I think it wasn't like a canon story kind of roleplay. It's kind of its own thing, like the After Years or whatever. Kind of like based on Dark Souls.
Hopefully mine is still convoluted though.
So
I think so, yes.
So Rail asked how I feel about being crit by another mummy soon. Rail, I'm fucking terrified about being crit by another mummy soon, because I think my character just, within the last 2 sessions got rid of the last case of mummy's rot you threw at me.
Oh, mummy's rot. What great memories.
It's bad when the fucking sorcerer blast mage gets hit with mummy's rot, because that means his front line is non-existent.
That is true. That is true. Okay, what else we got? Any more parting shots? Shots.
Shot. I mean, aside from this whole discussion we had about which game system fits which style of roleplay best, I don't know. I think we've, like, for tabletop, D20 is probably the best because that's the last thing, and then D10 for the actual, LARPing system. And you can come up with whatever system you want. We're not going to tell you can't do anything, but, whatever works best for you and your group, do that. Do that and be happy with it. I think the next topic was Phoebe asking, what about role-playing strictly in video game MMOs?
Yes, it's time. It's time to talk about this. It is time to talk about all those weird people in the World of Warcraft RP servers which just amounts to naked night elves dancing.
I mean, there's also, you got other MMOs where people roleplay strictly and that I can try to weigh in on. I need another mixer real quick, though.
Okay, so while Steve is mixing himself a drink, so I'm going to be real here, okay? Only one time have I ever been on a roleplay server where people were actually role-playing.
Wait, Phoebe, you play Guild Wars?
I actually, now that we bring it up and like all the embarrassing memories come flooding back, I totally did roleplay in World of Warcraft, and it was in my like horrible edgelord like early days.
Were you role-playing as a naked night elf dancing for tips?
No, it wasn't that.
Okay, well, that is all the roleplay I remember from World of Warcraft. What did you do?
Oh, let's see, in World of Warcraft, mostly my main character was a dwarf, and I typed with a shitty accent.
A shitty dwarf accent, you say? I specialize in those.
Yes, exactly that. What you're thinking, Steve.
Yes.
So I typed like that.
Trying to type in a dwarf accent. So for anybody who's never attempted it before, trying to type in a dwarven accent is fucking difficult.
Okay, trying to type in an accent is difficult. Although, wait, couldn't you have just roleplayed as a dwarf by just getting super drunk and then letting the chat system handle it?
I mean, Brandon, I'm not gonna lie, I've done that before. I'm not gonna lie, I've done that before. Do we have time for a quick story?
Yes, we do. Tell us a story. It's story time with Steve.
All right, so story time with Steve, or Stove, or whatever people want to call me. The very first 3.5 game I ever played, I played with Mr. Distorted Truth in the chat, who goes by Rail. We played with several mutual friends of ours who we met essentially. So this is the part where most of y'all are going to hate me. We met in League of Legends.
Oh, that's that good shit. Let's do it.
So we met, and it came up that like they've all played 3.5 D&D, and they played role-playing games, and they were starting a campaign. And I said, "Hey, I like doing things like that. I'll make a rogue." So I made a rogue. It was straightforward, nothing really over the top. It's a fun session, except for the first game session. The very first game session, we had a buddy of ours, a mutual friend, who we're not going to name because he's not in the chat, and I feel bad not calling out people who aren't here. Well, what he did, he played a paladin, right? I believe it was a human paladin. I forget which god he was dedicated to. And we go into a mining town because we're about to go into the dungeon. Right. He's not exactly a friend of Rail's, but he knows him. So we go into this mining town, right? This group of, I think there's a gnome, mage of some sort. I'm a human rogue. We have the human paladin, and I forget what the half-elf ranger. I believe Rail was a half-elf ranger at the time. So we go into the tavern, as you do in your very first session of Dungeons and Dragons. And it's a mining town, so it's, filled with dwarves and halflings and, ranger wizard going for arcane archer. So it's filled with your typical mining town people, humans, dwarves, the occasional halfling who's connected to the black market, so on and so forth. And everybody else just goes about their thing. I go and try to make connections with the black market because, hey, rogue gonna rogue. And the paladin walks in the room, and the first thing he said, lawful good paladin, first thing words out of his mouth are, fucking dwarves. In the middle of a room filled with dwarves, in a mining town filled with dwarves. As a lawful good paladin. That was my first exposure to tabletop roleplay. That clusterfuck. But we did go on from there, and we set up camp, we were ambushed, and then beginning of the next session, after he had to back out for various reasons, he kind of got eaten by a bear, and then set on fire by our new paladin, who was a dragonborn paladin. So everything worked out okay in the end.
Wow.
I like story time. We should have a stove story time every episode.
You should.
I like stove story time. Eventually, I'll run out of stories.
Pat, any parting shots?
No.
All right, so I guess that's going to wrap up this episode of Save versus Bourbon.
I don't think I failed my Save versus Bourbon.
I did. This time I did. But, so I'd like to thank everybody for showing up and watching, and I'd like to thank our special guest, Pat. Say hi one more time.
Hi, thanks for listening.
Yeah. If you enjoyed the show, follow the channel and come and watch next episode. Our next episode will be the worst characters you've ever made.
Oh joy!
Oh yes. And if you want to be part of the program, message me on Discord. For the next episode, we're gonna want maybe several guest stars. People can just join us. It'll be fine. If you don't have me on Discord, hit me on Twitter, and I guess that's it. I'll play us out. I hope everybody has an amazing night.
If you don't want to wish it, fuck. Okay, so now I failed my Save versus Bourbon at the end of the show. If you don't wish to message Brandon, you can message me on Discord as DDK Madcat, or Twitch as DDK Madcat, or at Twitter DDK Madcat, and share your stories and offer to join on and so forth. And we have so much fun here. Oh God, I'm drunk.
Excellent. Okay, thanks for watching, everybody. Have a great night.
Do. Say when. Are we exited?
No, we're not. I'm just playing the song, whatever.
Fair enough.
Everyone can hear us talking right now. We're being super unprofessional. We're talking over our own heads.
Bye, everyone.
I sure
Bye,
hope everyone has a good night.
Yeah, that.
I literally cannot find my end stream button. I'm trying to end the stream.